This is the 8-9 Combo.
This is the 8-9 Combo. I'm Brett McKay. This is Harry Jones. And here we go again, mate. Season 2 of the 8-9 Combo Rugby Podcast begins.
How's it, Brett? How's your Broncos? How's your loading? Do you have the stamina for the season? Are you ready?
Oh, it was hard pre-season. I trained the house down.
What is your position? What is your opinion on talking to strange people in steam rooms and saunas? Like if you're sitting in a sauna or steam room, you're just minding your own business, you got your AirPods in, you're listening to the end of a game, as I was, and the guy comes in and starts wondering, like, do you want to talk to a guy like that or no?
I don't go to gyms, therefore I don't do saunas and steam rooms. So that's easy.
Which is relevant to your off-season training.
Yeah, that's easy. But I play a reasonable amount of golf by myself, and when I inevitably end up playing through a group or play a couple of holes with a group, I don't mind talking to them. That's fine.
Well, I like
and
that
even
too.
If I've got pod things in, I just take them out and talk to them.
I like that too. But in a steam room, you're naked and you don't know the guy, and it's just weird.
That would be different.
I just pretended that I knew what he was saying and I made like all my responses I think were inappropriate actually in the end. Like I nodded where I should have shrugged and shrugged where I should have nodded. Until he left, and he seemed pretty upset with me. I had no idea.
I bet he was. We have got a fantastic chat with the new Chair of World Rugby, Brett Robinson, coming up in just a few minutes. And it was fantastic, mate. Really enjoyable way to start the year. And great that we've been able to start 2025 just as we did in 2024 with the boss man of the global game.
I mean, we always do it. I don't know, like it's expected now.
It's tradition. Yeah.
8-9 Combo, they get the World Rugby chief. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got Brett locked in for this time next year already.
Yeah, unless there's a coup or insurrection.
Yeah. And then we'll just get the next guy. Exactly right. We are, though, going to start with cheers and jeers. It's back for 2025. But we're going to start the new year with a double cheers, and we may actually elect to do this throughout the year as we kind of need to. So
let's make it where the person with the jeers can decide in the moment whether they feel cheerful or jeerful, and then they just go with it.
Great
okay,
idea.
so I'm starting with cheers. Okay.
Yeah, cheer me.
Champions Cup round 4 was sort of a pageant of an amazing rugby. And so I kind of want to cheer the idea that if we're trying for more scoring and more tries and more attack, we might need to just stop right now because scores of 80 and 60 and 6 tries by Damien Penaud were a little bit almost scary. But I'm going to turn to a match that wasn't one of the marquee events. It was the Northampton Saints, Franklin Gardens against Munster. And I found that I really liked this match, and I started thinking about why I loved it so much. I wasn't especially tied to either of these teams. I did know a lot of the players, and I liked that. I liked the way the crowd looked. I liked the way the Munster fans were interspersed with the green and black Saints crowd. I liked where they put their beers. And it seemed like they had a system where the beers would sit on the railing and you couldn't tell which guy was having which. It was all organized. I like the roar of the crowd. I like that Munster has an amazing ability to play terrible rugby and great rugby in the same match. The ebb and flow of the match was really interesting to me. I liked lesser known players like Tom Seabrook scoring a hat trick. I liked his name. Henry Pollock, who's coming on gangbusters and had a wonderful turnover. Gavin Coombs and a wonderfully named Diarmuid Kilgallen. Diarmuid Kilgallen. Could it be a more Irish name?
Yeah,
who also scored a wonderful try. And the moment, and I thought there's 3 ways to enjoy a match like that, where you just like the smashes, the crashes. You like and then the other ways to enjoy the flow of the game, like who's going to win. I'm not sure. Let's see how it's going to wrap up. And the final one is just the actual spirit of the crowd. I felt like I was really, getting it. My moment, though, the cheer was old Conor Murray. And this is my praise for a number 9. Going into contact in the middle of the field, knowing he's going to pay a price, but doing a backflip to the try scorer, opening up the entire channel in the middle, that beautiful backflip, just knowing where he can find his runner, taking a beautiful line right up the gut and just getting killed. Conor Murray, tough boy. He's not done yet. I think he wants to go Lions.
Yeah, won't that be an interesting debate over
Yeah.
the next few months, particularly over the course of the Six Nations?
He's pushing Jameson. Yeah. He's right there. He's good.
He's a good player. I like that. I like the long build up. I like the confusion about where Beers sits on the fence, but I like that. That's a good one. My cheers for you is this one was announced last week, and I love this. A little bit of history is going to be made on Friday, January 24. That's later this week, where Rugby Football Club Los Angeles, RFCLA, will travel to Fiji and face the Fijian Indrua at the iconic Churchill Park in Lautoka in the first ever matchup between a Major League Rugby team and a Super Rugby Pacific team. Now, it's a pre-season trial for both teams, but how good. And the implications for this going forward, I think, are massive. So, it's a trial game, but I really hope that there's something more of it. And I just hope it goes well. Like, I think I saw the prices for the stands. It's like $5, $10 for the stand, something like that. So if you're listening to us in Fiji, and I mean, not that you need any encouraging to go to the rugby, but that will be fantastic, I think.
That's smart. That's a good connection. Tying those together with a humongous expatriate community of Fijians in the Southern California area.
Yeah.
And also I think, we think of, because of the way maps are drawn, we don't think of the Pacific Rim, as it's sort of the tie that it is. And so I think we got to do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
You look at things like Hawaii and staging a match in Hawaii, for example, between San Diego and Tonga. Like, there's just so many ways you can start doing that.
Absolutely.
I think it'd be great for the game.
No, it'd be fantastic. And there's so many local, like RFC LA is coached by Stephen Hoyles. Christian Liliafano has just signed with them to play 10 this year. So, the links are going to be great. So I just hope it's a really, really great game on Friday, and hope that the event itself and the concept can build into something more going forward. We spoke with new World Rugby Chair Brett Robinson on the weekend, mate, and it was an enlightening discussion, I think. What were you hoping to get out of it going into the chat?
Well, I wanted to see to what extent he's an agent of change, and to what extent he was a successor handpicked by Bill Beaumont and representing, even though Southern Hemisphere, and would obviously play that up, but if he was really the Oxford man that he is, and that it was sort of a way for Beaumont et al. To continue what they were doing. So I was interested in how he would draw a distinction between the Beaumont era and the Robinson administration. And that's one of the questions that I ended up posing to him.
Yes.
And I think I was interested in knowing also if I liked him, because I didn't know him. He's not one of those guys that's sort of been out there as much as some of the candidates, like Picho from Argentina. You kind of know that guy. He's all over the place, Gus. But Brett Robinson was sort of a quiet presence. And so, I was just interested in how funny he was, and he ended up being a good talk.
It was good. Yeah. It was a really interesting chat, and I think his administration game already is a mirror of how he played it. He just got on with the job, didn't have the fanfare, wasn't the most talented, wasn't the headline act, and he would just get it on. So let's then get straight into it. Kick off season 2 of the 8-9 Combo Rugby Podcast. Here is our chat with World Rugby Chair Brett Robinson. We kicked off the 8-9 Combo Rugby Podcast with the biggest possible guest in rugby in 2024, Sir Bill Beaumont, and we're thrilled to say we have done it again, kicking off 2025 with the biggest possible guest in rugby. It feels like tradition now, it really does. What is also tradition on the 8-9 Combo is for Harry to get schoolgirl giddy with excitement about a guest from time to time, and all I can do is hand over to him for what will be another memorable intro. So have at it, mate.
How's it, Brett? No one's ever confused me with a schoolgirl. Yes, episode 1 of season 2. I want to remind everyone, in the spellbinding 2024 political thriller film Conclave with Ray Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow, and Isabella Rossellini, we saw papal succession dramatized as a hand-picked liberal candidate fights off a social conservative, a moderate, and a traditionalist, only for a mystery candidate to swoop in at the 11th hour and after 6 ballots and turn the smoke of the Vatican white and the bells of St. Peter's are ringing. Late last year in Dublin, the Council of Rugby met and just 2 ballots were required to elect an Australian chairman of the game for the first time, nipping old French number 8, Banazzi. It was kind of 2 number 8s against each other. Sorry, Brett McKay. And the first ballot was 27-25. Ronaldo of Roma was knocked out. And then Brett Robinson, the pride of Australia, took that available votes 5-4 to assume the chair from now to 2008, encompassing Lions Tour and a World Cup in his homeland. The Global Chair of World Rugby does exercise a great deal of power and influence on the future of the game that we love. And so we are now going to talk to the man whose first order of business is to arrest rugby's perilous finances and build a bulwark against insolvency, move the levers, grow intelligently, and in his words, and he's an Oxford doctor of philosophy, so listen to the man, there is not enough ball and play, too much senseless kicking, and we're not promoting teams to attack. Dr. Brett Robinson, a Wallaby 16 times, a man who played against the Wallabies and captained the Oxford, an ACT Brumbies captain. What does he not captain? And a doctor with a PhD who can actually make an artificial knee. Welcome, Brett Robinson.
Bloody
Thank
hell.
you, Harry. Thanks, Brett. That's some intro.
That's some intro.
Smoke? We need a bit of smoke. A smoking ceremony or something like that.
Was there? This is not the first time I've heard, papal succession linked to the World Rugby Chair's job. So can we knock that one on the head straight away? There was no smoke involved in Dublin, was there?
No smoke. No, there's a vote held by all the council, and there were 3 candidates. So once you had to go to a second round once you got through to the final 2. So yeah, and then it was pretty tight though. The vote was 27-25. It was down to the wire.
Yeah. And history made. First Southern Hemisphere chair, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real privilege and an honour. I think it's symbolic, I think, of where the game's at as well, because it wasn't necessarily a campaign that was geographically divided. So there was some philosophical differences, but geographically it wasn't a North versus Southern Hemisphere position. I was running with Jonathan Webb to be my vice chair and had very good support from the home union. So that was really good, because I think it's important for where we need to go, that we aren't sort of reverting back to what would sort of historical geographical politics. So it was good. It was a fascinating process, and a real privilege and an honour to be supported by the members, and really looking forward to what's a really exciting 4 years for rugby. So it's my role to help support the board and the management team and the game, making the most of what's an amazing 4 years, really.
Should we make a movie about the process, and who would play you in this movie?
Great question.
But no idea. Someone probably haven't got their head screwed on properly, perhaps.
Oh, that is the first question. Why on earth would you ever want to be the chair of World Rugby when you're going to get fired at by every side about money and rules changes and refs and concussion? It just seems like a really tough job.
Yeah, look, I was asked to consider it by primarily by England and New Zealand and other colleagues. They felt that there was something about my style of leadership that they felt could be helpful to progress the game. I'm probably a little bit more contemporary than some, not wanting to sort of play the age wars, but someone in their early to mid 50s, there's sort of an unusual age profile. Often these roles have gone to people sort of in their sort of 60s or 70s. So I think that they felt that, and because I'd played the game in both the amateur and professional years, I'd worked in the high performance unit of Rugby Australia, been on director of Australian Rugby, have sons that play the game at a reasonably high level and girls that have played sevens. So I guess they felt that I had enough knowledge and experiences that could be helpful. And And why? Because rugby is a bit of a drug, as it is for you guys, hey? Because it's once it's drawn you in, it's this beautiful game. I mean, it has these values that we talk about, that we just know. So when you walk into a rugby club or onto a rugby field or in a rugby culture, there's just the way we do things that I think we should be really proud of. And I think it's a point of difference for our sport over other sports. So I'm motivated to elevate the values of our sport, but also to take the opportunities that I think are ahead of us, because World Rugby is still a relatively young organisation in the professional sense.
Yeah.
It's only 30 years since the game turned professional, and we had a World Cup in Australia in '87, which really was the big trigger for change in World Rugby, because it went from being a regulator, a lawmaker, a calendar signatory, to being a revenue producer. And that revenue is significant, and that revenue then it needs to be distributed back to help grow the sport globally. And the purpose of World Rugby is not just to focus on regulation, shape of the game, the product. It's also to help the game grow into new markets, and also particularly with the growth of the women's game this year. We've got a Rugby World Cup in England in September. There's going to be a fabulous event. Ticket sales are already well above what we had expected, and there's huge demand for the tournament. So that's after a Lions tour in Australia, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is already pretty much sold out. So it's it's going to be a great year, and we kick off in Perth next week. We're heading to Perth for the Sevens in Australia, so that'll be wonderful to kick off the year before we get into Super Rugby down here.
Was there a point in the process where you thought Australian rugby politics is pretty ordinary sometimes? Is it going to be better at international level? Like, do you go home and tell the family, I've been asked to consider the World Rugby Chairmanship, and do they look at you and go, really? Are you forgetting something?
Yeah, I think there is a politic to an extent, but I do feel, particularly now we're on the other side of the election, and I've started to connect up with all of the members. So I basically said to them, if I was elected, I was going to establish a process of reflection and refreshment of the future 4 to 8 years, and have re-engaged with Abdul, Gus from Argentina, Mark Alexander only last night. So I've had calls pre and post Christmas for an hour with every major union CEO and chair, and also of all the regional presidents and CEOs to just get some direct feedback one-on-one about where they feel the game is at, and why, where they see opportunities, where they see our greatest challenges. Because the role is really about unification. It's the need to bring together the collective and get us all heading in one direction. Because like any great team, once you get a united group of people, anything's possible. And rugby, to be fair, has done extraordinarily well. I think we forget where we've come from since '87 to today, and the move through the professional years, taking World Cups to new markets like Japan, and the World Cup in France was an absolute cracker. The Sevens last year in Paris, unbelievable tournament, 550,000 people through over 6 days, 125,000 people on the second day, both the men's and women's. There's a lot for us to shout proudly about. I mean, we can always get into the sort of controversial questions about shape of the game and ball in play time, and
we need to soften you up first, though.
But I'm sure that'll come. But there's actually a lot for us to be. We've got close to 9 million participants globally. Almost 3 million of them are women. You sort of we truly are a global sport, and I know. In Australia, we've got incredible competition from the domestic codes of rugby league and AFL, but one point of difference we truly have is we're a great global game, and I think some people outside of Australia get that, but inside Australia, sometimes you feel that they don't quite understand the nature of it, which is why that Lions tour this year is going to be so significant, because people will see, the world, the Northern Hemisphere come here.
It was
over that. It's amazing.
It was a tour to Australia that I think turned you on to rugby union, right? The Irish tour, is that right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
What does that do when you have a big tour like that? How do you think it works on the young lads?
Well, you spark. Again, I use the example that I had Dad. We grew up in Toowoomba. At that stage, I was playing rugby league at a rugby league school, and as a young boy, and then Dad was a rugby guy and loved to come. Toowoomba's about 2 hours drive from west of Brisbane. Come to Ballymore, which is this iconic sort of Brisbane stadium. And I got to watch my first live game of rugby with the Wallabies playing the Irish. And a guy called Ollie Campbell kicked and won the game single-handedly and beat the Wallabies on that tour. And I'll never forget sitting on the hill at Ballymore and thinking, what is this international sport? Didn't really understand much about it. But then I went on to play it at school, and then come to Brisbane and play it at a club level. And then I got the greatest gift in the last few months is just prior to the election, I had a cup of tea with Ollie Campbell.
Oh, wow.
And Ollie came in and gave me a copy. It was the 150th anniversary of Irish rugby.
Yeah.
On the same day the Wallabies played the Irish on the tour, just gone. And prior to that, Ollie came to meet me because he's great friends with Andrew Slack and Paul McLean, who played against him on that tour. And they'd introduced him and told him of the story. And he thought he'd come and, he's this most amazing, humble man. But he came into the Westbury Hotel in Dublin when I was there and had a cup of tea, and we had a lovely catch up. So that was a real privilege. And that's, this winning that match sparked my interest in rugby, 30, 40 years ago. And there I am having a cup of tea with him in Dublin.
Yeah. No pressure, Ollie, but I am literally here because of you.
Yeah.
The ties that bind us around rugby, the fact that you can go to any, as an old Cape Townian, I can wander into a place in Sydney, into a rugby club, and I'm at home immediately. I know what they're talking about. I know what we're going to do next. You actually spent time in Oxford, as we talked about, and I just looked at your team sheet. And besides the fact that your number 13 was called Sharif, which is an ideal name for the number 13.
In this day and age.
I looked at some of the people, and they're just from everywhere. A Canadian guy, Chachuk. He had, a guy named Sochi Fujigami, who had to be from Japan, maybe.
Sochi for Japan, Sochi, and Aki. Aki was our replacement halfback. Sochi replacement fly half. I still see these guys, by the way. I mean, when I was in Japan for the World Cup, I caught up with Aki. Aki's working for Amazon. Soshi's still coaching. He played for Coca-Cola. Soshi, I remember at a training session once, he stopped me and he said, "Brett, would you please speak the Queen's English?" He couldn't understand a word I was saying. He's the Australian drawl, but he pitched me up and said, "Mate, tighten up. I just can't understand a word that's coming out of him mouth." But those guys, Werner van Pidius was from Stellenbosch. Great centre, people from all over the place. And I still, this is your point about friendships and relationships. We've got our 25-year reunion next year, which I'll be at. So, be fabulous.
Well, I also was looking at some of the quotes you had as, captain number 8, lifting the trophy, beaming. Your face looks so happy. And you actually said, in a match that you won 9-6 over Cambridge, the dark blue over light blue. We dominated possession, and I couldn't be happier. This is one of the greatest moments of my rugby life. You won 9-6. That proves that we don't need more attacking rugby. Let's go back to the grind.
It was a grind. Box kicks, catching box kicks, kicking the touch, and kicking your goals. Yeah, it was the day. But it was a really lovely moment because that was my last game of rugby. So I actually left my boots in the sheds at Chookman after we beat Cambridge, and felt that it was time. So it was lovely because I'd played the game as an amateur, I played the game as a professional, and I got to play with this bunch of amateurs in my last game. And it was the biggest thing for many of them in their lives. Like Will Ruby, the guy that scored the try against against the Wallabies played in that game, and he went on to, and these guys go on to become, you know, amazing people in their working lives. But rugby doesn't probably get much bigger than that moment. And Sammy Adlin was the centre in that team as well. And Sammy is now the CEO of a aerospace organization that's capturing energy from the sun and sending it back to the earth through satellites. That's where he's at. His PhD was to try and find water on Mars for NASA.
Get that guy to teach the French how to pour beer at a World Cup. I mean, we're done.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing. But that's the point. It's the point, Harry, isn't it? You can come from Cape Town to Sydney, and you've got friends and relationships and networks that
easy.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I want you to show. I want the other Brett to show you something. He has a hidden talent, which he has a jersey for every occasion, which is his missus probably is upset about. But let me let you show you this one.
This is a bit of a ripper. This one, and Brett, I think you might recognise this one. Let me.
Oh wow!
That's
our old jersey.
This is genuine 1996 ACT Brumbies jersey.
Milk, that's mine.
This is your jersey, Brett. Now I need to ask you about this because
wow,
I'm going to try and hold up on the back here, down towards the right corner here.
Yeah.
Is there
a bit of a patch-up job? Oh. Can you see that? Now that would be a hand job, which I'm going to guess was Gary Quinn after that game.
Quinzo, yeah.
Do you have a matching scar for that jersey?
I was getting the shit kicked out of me by someone. I'll never forget, because those were the good old days where you could ruck. And I remember we had a game against the Hurricanes at Bruce Stadium where I got the wrong side of a ruck and got absolutely minced by I don't know who it was, one of those lads, but might have been that jersey. Didn't have Owen Finnegan looking after me and Troy Coker.
They didn't do a great job, evidently, judging by the length of this.
They said, "Robbo, you're on your own, mate."
So look at that. That's a bit of Brumbies
history.
Oh,
they're a great old jersey, eh?
Yeah. And the thing that I noticed holding it up is that they were fairly comfortable fitting back then, weren't they?
They used.
It's pretty square in shape.
They were really. It's crazy. All the jerseys were big, baggy tents.
Yeah.
And that was the reason, I guess, was to, when you were scrummaging, to hold on to grip.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know what the logic was, but if you look at what the guys wear today, like they're skin tight. Perhaps it was because we weren't as good a shape as they are today. Big Owen Finnegan couldn't
it was to make props feel better about themselves. Is what it was.
Fit. Yeah.
Now they cannot get the jerseys off at half time. They want to take them off to breathe. And
there's a bit of history. I'll tell you afterwards how I've come to be in possession of this temporarily.
Oh wow!
There you go. There's a throwback.
Yeah.
I had mentioned to someone that we might be talking about Robinson. They went, got something for you. So anyway, we'll come back to that. Are you? What do the next 4 years look like for you? Where are you wanting to? Like you've laid out your vision for the game. I suppose it's a long game to lay out that vision. So I suppose the obvious question is, where do you start? Like, how do you start laying out that vision in 2025?
Well, I started it pretty well straight away after the election by bringing together the new board and in a virtual call, and then also agreeing on the process of reconnection and reestablishment of what we want to be as a game in the next 4 to 8 years. So that process is kicked off directly with me, but also directly with the World Rugby staff and the member unions. So we're going through a 3 to 6 month strategic refresh where we bring the council together in May and in September for the Women's World Cup to reset what our priorities are. There may be that not a lot of that will be different from where we were, but I think it's important to go through that exercise. And we have our first face-to-face board meeting in Perth next week as well. So the board directors are coming out. Again, great that they're coming away from the Northern Hemisphere to a tournament in Perth. And we've also got another board meeting in Hong Kong, the next one after that. So to take people sort of out of that traditional world of the Northern Hemisphere, and then spend time discussing and considering our priorities. I mean, the game has got some significant challenges that it's facing, and particularly the member unions themselves are facing significant financial pressures. And I guess the tension in that for us as World Rugby is to support helping them deal with what some of those things might be and how we can help, as well as us continuing to meet our mission, which is to build and grow this game and make it more accessible to all, and relevant to people. And that includes sort of the day-to-day support we give around competitions, the Future of the Nations Championship, Rugby World Cups in England, Australia, USA. So we've got a roadmap there. We have a women's tournament this year and a women's game that's booming. That comes with its challenges because the unions themselves, we sort of had a men's 15s game that was our priority and I guess a pyramid pathway and resources that were funding that. But now we've added in the layers of the women's game and also the sevens game that are asking and need additional funding to support them, but with revenue challenges at the top to support that. So there needs to be net investment into those growth pathways, but that puts pressure back on the traditional and foundational elements of the men's 15s game. So many unions are trying to deal with that, and we're funding a lot of that support through competitions. So World Rugby is putting about £50 million into women's competitions over this 4 years. We're putting about £45 to £50 million, I should say, into sevens to support sevens programs around the world. And we're putting another £50 million roughly into player safety and welfare, where we've done an enormous amount of work looking at instrumented mouth guards, concussion research, return to play protocols. So that's money that we can help the unions with, because it's money that that we provide to support. But in doing that, particularly for the men's and the women's, so the sevens and the women's game, they have to fund operationally the programs, the staff, the contracting of the players. So it's definitely putting some pressure on. So that's why, the revenue opportunities of a Nations Cup is really important. That additional meaningful content twice a cycle outside of a World Cup will become more valuable for them and for the participants of that. It also allows us to have that second tier of competition for the next 12. So Rugby World Cup in Australia is going to have another 4 teams. So we need to give them those 4 teams and that next layer of team more competition. So there's the Nations Championship going to kick off in 2026 before 27. So we're hoping to have a full year of that tournament, both tier 1 and tier 2, in helping prepare for the tournament in Australia. So I think, the role that I play is as a chair. The chair sets the tone, helps facilitate, coordinate, make sure the culture's right, ensures the executive are held accountable and are delivering, communicates back to the members. We're responsible for significant surpluses that we deliver for the game. So the World Cup in France delivered about £470 million of surplus. Australia, we're targeting about £550 million of surplus. The USA, 750. So they're big sums that we're looking at producing, and that money is needed because it supports those things that we've just been talking about.
Yeah, it's the test rugby that generates. It's not just that investment goes. It correlates. Obviously, in Ireland, I saw figures of 85% of their revenue, IFRU, comes from test rugby. It's no problem to sell out stadiums in France at a World Cup. They're all sold out, and the major sponsors are flocking around Australia and USA World Cups. It's not, you don't have to twist any arms. They want major brands.
Yeah.
So in some ways, you run into the difficulty of new guy coming in, want to differ from the old guy. You want to do something different and progress, but there's an awful lot that's going right. And
there is.
And the trick is also not to do too much to negatively affect the trajectory. One thing that comes up a lot, so we just kind of canvas people, and here's one of the things: shape a game. And I just did a really quick rundown, from the 80s, pre-pro, and then right when you played at Oxford, and then 2019, 23. So we have scrums gone down from 32 a game to about 13, 14, lineouts from 45 to 25, carries concomitantly come up from 170 to 230, 240, tackles obviously from 100 to 320 a game sometimes now, and rucks from 50 to 150, 160, 170. So more collisions, bigger, stronger players, much quicker, more fit. More refereeing has to happen around a breakdown. It's the most complicated area of our game. People say scrums are lottery, rucks are lottery too. And also it's harder for tier 2 nations to really come up and play with depth against if you have to have 160 rucks and all these collisions and carries. You just don't have the same carry quality. And so one question is there a point where you just stop tinkering and let it be? Because there might be a point where ball and play sort of tops out, and there's nothing more you can do. You have to have some reload time, and unless you make everyone be less fit, less quick, less big, which is not going to happen, aren't we going down a road where we have dissonance, where there's going to be more risk because there's more tackles, more carries, more rucks, and ruck cleaning and ruck carrying is really difficult. And when did we just say, let's let this sit for 5, 6, 7 years now for a while?
Well, we had, after the World Cup in 23, we had a significant amount of work we did with fans, talking to them about what was frustrating them just at or after the World Cup. And the feedback we got was, the game's in pretty good shape, and a good game of rugby can be a great game, and sometimes a poor game of rugby can be pretty poor. But they felt that there was too much kicking that they didn't understand, and we had a lot of problems with the box kicking becoming very popular. The caterpillar ruck, ball sitting at the back of a ruck for 5 minutes before it was kicked, and they were getting frustrated by sort of ping pong rugby. They were also getting frustrated by the fact that there wasn't enough promotion of teams to hang on to the football. Teams were actually feeling that they were better not having the ball than having the ball. So there was a sense that the laws weren't enabling. And the other thing they said was there was just a lot of dead time. There was frustrations around rucks and scrums and resets, and just this sort of frustration about dead time. So what we did straight after the World Cup last year, and we've got another meeting coming up in February to reflect on this, is say, well, what are some things we could do to speed up the game, sort of deal with some of those frustrations, introduce some laws that dealt with sort of some silly or meaningless things, and those things have worked pretty well. So we're doing a review of those in March, but we've run 12 months of trials. There's more trials to come in the Six Nations, but we've increased the ball in play time by about 3.5 to 4 minutes just by introducing shot clocks. So shot clocks for kicks, line outs, kickoffs. That's made a big difference. We've introduced the break foot, which has meant we haven't had as many collapsing of scrums. We've introduced things like, if a ball's not straight into a line out and no one's contesting, let's play on, let's not go to a scrum. The caterpillar rucks, we've said, guys, you've got to use the ball within 3 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds. It can't just be sitting at the back. So we've had, things like leaving the halfback alone. There was the frustration that halfbacks were trailing people around the scrum and creating sloppy ball, and we just want the ball into play so it's more attractive. So we're looking at sort of tweaking sensible things, but you're right. We could have, the only thing I'd say is I don't think our system allows us, we haven't allowed this to do things as neatly as we would like. So you have this trial process where you get different competitions that are trialing different elements, and that's really confusing for fans. It's confusing for referees and players and coaches, because you've got in one hemisphere this happening, in another hemisphere this happening over a 12-month period. Ultimately it lands in a position, because we look to lock things down to enable us at least 2 to 3 years out from a World Cup have consistency of what we're doing. The one that's sort of been interesting in the last little while is just trying to educate those that don't quite understand the use of the 20-minute red cards. So we found in the Southern Hemisphere that was really helpful, because it meant that the player still could have the sanction and the outcome if they were, illegally tackling someone, but it allowed us to ensure there was a contest that continued because a player could come back onto the field for that person. In the Northern Hemisphere, there were some concerns about whether that was seen to be going soft on head contact. But what we've been able to do through the trial process is they can see that the consequences of having some of those players not come back on were significant. And even just in the autumn series, I don't know if you saw it, but there were some really contentious calls where people went, oh, okay, well, that makes sense now that player wasn't off for the whole game. So I think, I think your point's, Harry, a good one about we need to set and continue. But I think if we're not responding to that feedback from our fans, we become irrelevant. People get frustrated, and there's so much competition for eyeballs that we, and look, I think and the other thing about that process is it wasn't a southern-northern divide. Everyone was pretty consistent about their views on those issues. But we're going into another sort of review process in the next couple of weeks, and I don't think we'll see much more change come out of that, only other than locking down those things that we've improved in the last year.
Do you think all those trials will go through into law in the next 12 months or so now?
Yeah. I think the one that we couldn't get through, which was interesting, was the second, the two-stop maul. So we trialed to say once you've had one shove and it stops once, then you have to move the ball on. There was a bit of resistance to that. I think the 20-minute red card will get there. I think people in the north are seeing that some of those concerns they had are not material now. So I think that'll be fine. But you'll see those all through the Six Nations, and we put it to a vote in May.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So some of the pushback that I hear, and I believe myself, is in some sports that are doing very well and bringing in more people than we do, Major League Baseball, hockey leagues, English Premiership, the prowess of defensive players is celebrated. So there's an all defensive team in the NBA. Blocks, steals are celebrated. You know who the career leader in steals on the NBA. John Stockton, everyone knows it. They are lions. Goalkeepers, center forwards can be some of their favorite players for Liverpool or Man U or Barcelona. And so the negating skill, the skill of being a David Pocock, and in one moment sort of arresting all the pretty phase play that you can do, because if I can snaffle you or jackal you, it's done at constant possession. And so when fans, and I sometimes wonder how good a fan are you, decry kicks. I mean, look at Joseph Soali, that play from a kick. There couldn't have been a better highlight in the Autumn Nations than a kick that was claimed back. Or some of these, when we've taken away the escorts, some of the kick highlights have been truly spectacular. So you wouldn't want a game where you were too motivated to only do phase play, which never scores from your own 22. I mean, every now and then, but most of the time, grinded out phase play. The defenses are too set. You have to have fractured bull. So is there a role that we have, just like a restaurateur? It's like, I know what you like, customer, but I'm going to introduce something new. I'm going to teach you why the scrum is cool. I'm going to teach you why kicking is makes us different.
Yeah, well, I think the principles of rugby, two of the fundamentals of rugby, is it's a game for all shapes and sizes, and it's a game for the contest. We're a contestable sport constantly. At every moment there's a contest. So if your scrum is dominant, then you are benefiting from that. If your line out defense is excellent, if your counter rucking is excellent, if your kick off receipt and kick off chase is excellent, if you're I think if you've got a dominant tackle, if you've got a great jackler, those things I think they are the beauty of the contest of our game. And the balance is to make sure that you enable that and support it, whilst we don't create complexity and difficulty for people to understand how does that work. And that's the other side of it, because they're complex areas of our sport, as we know. And for the traditionalists, there's something that people will deeply understand. But if you're a new fan to the game, which is why Sevens is actually a really good sport to introduce people to, because it's simpler to play and to watch and to understand than the rugby game traditionally might be.
Is there
the
evidence
scrums-
for sevens bringing? Is it a sort of a gateway drug? People get hooked on sevens and then come into 15s, or do they stick with sevens?
I think most of the sort of top tier nations use it as a breeding ground for talent to come into their 15s programs. There's one of my boys going off to the gym.
I was
Good on him.
gonna
Stop
say,
throwing weights. Yeah.
someone running out of your house just right now.
But for for some of the emerging nations, it's it's the top end of their sport. I think we do use sevens to trial and experiment with things though. So some of the shot clock and others, and why we can do that is because the sevens tournament is owned and run by World Rugby, our referees, our events, our tournaments. So we can actually trial things and work with the players and the coaches to do that. Whereas across the year, it's a bit more complicated because our players and coaches and teams are all in their domestic tournaments, and it's not as easy. It's not as same sort of petri dish that sevens is. I think depending on the country, a women's sevens team could be their preeminent team. Right now in Australia, the women's sevens team is one of the great teams, I think, of any women's team in Australia.
National teams,
that the US and Canadian national teams in sevens, but their 15s teams are very good as well for women. So for some countries and for some markets, it's a much better product for them to lead with over 15s as well. In some countries, when on these calls that I've been talking to, the Asian markets particularly are seeing, in Pakistan, in India, in China, in these countries, they see in the UAE,
Korea.
It's a really good game to get people playing.
Yeah. Just taking Harry's previous point a little bit further, is the scrum and is the breakdown contest a way that we can actually, that can be celebrated and as a way to bring new fans into the game? And just over the summer period, I've got into the Netflix series. I'm not sure whether you've seen it or heard of it, and it's literally called Rugged Rugby: Conquer or Die, and it's a 7 or 8 part series. It's really interesting. It's
South
a
Korea.
7 or 8 part series made in Korea, dubbed into pretty ordinary English, I must say, but it's made up of 7 teams, 4 professional teams, 2 university teams, and their armed forces team. And the first 2 episodes of it is literally around the progression to the next round is based off scrums. So for the first episode was an hour of scrummaging for these 2 teams. We've just watched an hour of scrums here, and it was actually quite. It became strategic. They had teams working out: do we want to scrum against them? Do we hold back? Do we go early? There was all that sort of thing. And I thought, here's rugby going into a different market, and it's via scrums.
If you think about, over the years, certain countries and cultures put the scrum at the front end of their game. The Argentinians for many years were
Georgia.
The crumb. Pato Noriega, was one of the starting front rowers for that Brumbies jersey that you showed, played for Australia, and for the Georgians have got a wonderful scrum. The South Africans, I don't know if you saw the South Africans play Scotland on the recent autumn series. They just dominated and won the game. That the scrum took Scotland out of the game. So there's definitely, for sides that want to make that strategically their power play, they do. And so that's where you have to work around that. So one of the great things about rugby is that there's always a way to counter that. And the sevens, the Japanese, I don't know if you remember, have become experts at channel 1 ball. So that's where effectively you're putting the ball onto the hooker's foot and the ball's coming out between the second row and the flanker, and it's in and out. So they're not trying to get caught up in the wrestle. They need the ball in and out quickly because they know, because of the scale of the differences in weight and height, that they can't compete. So it's how do you combat that, which is interesting for those of us that are purists.
But so my anecdote for both of you, Brett, is that around when I was in France for the World Cup, when we had a game, and we were just messing around, drinking beer with opponents, we'd end up scrumming each other. I mean, it was the thing we could do. We couldn't convene a lineout. Someone's going to die on that concrete. We couldn't play phase play and tackling 55-year-old guys, but you could pack down a scrum. And in emerging markets like Mexico, like in parts of the US that I go to, people are fascinated by it. The actual bind of it. And you get a guy like John Madden in the NFL who was able to explain what holding looked like, what leverage looked like, and you popularize the grunt, and you actually give them names like hogs, and you start that is a thing that can appeal to countries like Bulgaria or Germany if they want to play rugby more. So it's interesting that we sometimes don't sell the right parts. And I think there's parts of rugby that are just so unusual that no one else.
Which is why it fascinated me that this Netflix series was based on the scrum. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jake Howard, who's a great coach of mine, the Wallaby himself, and father of Pat Howard, coached us at the Brumbies and the Wallabies. And he said the most important two selections in any team are your tight head prop and then your reserve tight head prop. Because that particular position, if you understand the game, is at the heart of stability of the platform and of possession. And if you're weak there and you get slaughtered by an opposition, you will have a bad day at the office.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Are you worried about the large trend, maybe societal, of people not wanting to leave their houses and do things? I'm looking at fascinating statistics about restaurant traffic and more people staying home more. And so the idea that you have to, in the end, get bums in seats on none of these numbers work. They don't work at the Premiership. They are working in top 14. They are working in Cape Town. They're working in Dublin. They're working in places, but not all around. Are you worried that some other sports like cricket or Formula One, they create a whole weekend of like a festival? There's longer. UFC is a 6-hour thing. An NFL experience is a 4-hour thing. Are we almost in our drive to make shorter games, shooting ourselves in the foot? Because yes, it's good for the TV, but if I'm going, and I went to 8 tests last year, I want to have a whole thing. I want to have a carnival. I want to have a 4-hour experience.
Yeah, I think tours and tournaments, like one of the beauties of rugby is it's a global game that often we grew up touring, playing, traveling, and that's about connecting into a culture and making relationships that are lifelong. And so I think that we need to really celebrate those moments, like the Lions tours, like our inbound tours, like the tour that the boys have just been on to the north, and all of us that have ever played know that time away on tour together with a team actually brings you together. You have special time together, traveling, being with each other, experiencing things together. So great teams are often united around those moments. So I think that's a really important point, Harry. We need to not lose sight of the importance of touring and connecting.
So can you make the French take their best players down to New Zealand this year?
Great question. Great question. Yeah.
I know Mark Robinson's been trying to work through that with the guys. So
yeah. But for something like the Nations Championship, it's going to almost dictate that they have to, because if you concede a couple of games in July, you make your November internationals pretty hard to play catch up in. So I suppose that maybe negates it, but yeah, we've got to get away, and I suppose that's the important part of the context around those games, and that's what the Nations Championship you're hoping will do.
Yeah, I think that annual, basically it's an annual winner of the global season, in between World Cups with the final, and I think bringing meaning to the whole year is going to be a fantastic shift for the game in between the cycles of World Cups, and we have our mini tournaments. We'll still have our Six Nations winners. We'll still have our Rugby Championship winners, but to have that sort of annual Nations Cup winner will just be, I think. Look, we've been trying to get this global calendar sorted for 30 years, so to actually have now sort of locked down what that's going to look like. And still, I believe we're not far away from announcing that that's going to be sorted. So I think it's well on its way now.
The other sports are all 100 years old, 80 years old. So, we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves that we are still a young sport. But that might be the signature thing of your era. I mean, what do you think the Beaumont era will be remembered as, and what do you hope that the Robinson administration brings rugby?
Yeah, I mean, Bill was a statesman and a gentleman, an ambassador, great ambassador for the game. In his time, we didn't succeed in getting the Nations Championship through the first time. We got it through the second time. I think there were significant changes to regulations that allowed the islands, particularly, to have players return to play for their country.
Yeah, that was good.
It's called the homecoming that I thought was significant. I think the decision to move to making longer term decisions around World Cups was a good one as well. So we weren't as narrow in our focus, and I think in the establishment and the investment in the growth of the women's game. So Bill and Alan and Brett Gosper and the board of, as you said earlier, the things that not all's broken. So what do I think I'll bring? I think I'm a little bit more contemporary, so I'm a bit more connected. I'm a bit more commercial. So I've got, through my working life, I've got commercial experiences. I think I'm, I think I've got a deep knowledge of safety and welfare issues because of my background clinically. I'm a concussion researcher, so safety and welfare. But what I'd like to see is shift faster and harder. So I'm an impatient Australian. So I probably feel at times, and this isn't pointing the finger at anyone, I think culturally World Rugby is only 30 years young as an organisation post that 87 World Cup, and I still think we do things in a way that is a little bit still, locked in the past. So I'm really keen for us to shake up how we go about things, to do things faster and respond, in a different way. But I've also got to be patient.
A lot of people to talk to.
And I've got to bring people with us. It's all well and good to be jumping up and down, but if no one's with you, so the great challenge is to bring Gus and Abdul and the South Africans and let's get ourselves all together again and get moving, because we're a great sport and there's so much opportunity.
What's the low-hanging fruit? What do you think you can change the quickest, where there's the most unity?
Yeah. What's the quick win?
I think we can. Yeah, I think that there's some things we've been doing quickly around the shape of the game, which have been positive. I think implementing this Nations Championship quickly and locking down the calendar is going to be critical for give people certainty. There's been a little bit of ambivalence about the US, so that not everyone's convinced. And my role, I think, is to get people on the same page about what we believe it to be a tremendous opportunity for the sport, and to get everyone united around how we might attack supporting the US plan. That's a really important part of the next 6 months, because, we've made a commitment to it, but you've got members that are sort of, I'm not so sure. And, I think we've got to say, explain to people the huge opportunity that we see in growing new markets, because we have, clearly, big markets in Europe that are, 60 to 70% of the revenue and the fan base because of the scale of the people there. But they're really maxing out in terms of opportunity. So we just need to start enabling those other markets. And I think that the women's performances at the Olympics, the Canadian, the US women's teams, can show you that the women's game in North America is going incredibly well, and they're very competitive. So in that, as we saw in Japan, having the host unions go deep into the tournament's really important, because it connects locally with the fan base. Yeah. So we're really hoping to try and lift the standards of the Canadian and the US team, because if we can do the same in the men's, having, the Japanese go to the quarterfinal, if we could get, even into the round of 16, the US team, it would be great for the tournament and the interest locally.
It's interesting because of the scale and size. I mean, living in the US, I can speak to this, and coming from South Africa, where people sometimes looked at the US and thought, that's a sleeping giant forever. But Major League Soccer draws 23,000 per game on average across the whole season, which puts them 6th in the whole world in all leagues. That's over 11, 12 million people. bums in seats. And the women's soccer is perennially number one in the world. And so it doesn't take more than about 2 or 3% of U.S. interest in a sport to get there, because it's 330 million people,
and they launched
up 3 million,
and they launched off the back of a home World Cup, didn't they?
So and I think with the larger point of isn't rugby better when we go to World Cups and there's probably 10 contenders instead of now, which is usually there's really about 3, like realistically 4. This last time it was, France, New Zealand, South Africa, and Ireland, and there was very little chance of the other teams threatening. Wouldn't it be better if you come together and there really is a lot of jeopardy and doubt, and there's 10, 12 teams that have a shot at it, for it to really grow into the rivalry sport that you need?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, competitiveness of teams is everything, isn't it? You just watch the shift in the commentary around the Lions tour because the Wallabies beat the English. People were sort of writing us off. Danny Kerr made that terrible quote. I think the energy around the Lions tournament now, because the Wallabies, 1-2, probably unlucky against the Irish, far out. And so I think
the unknown of who will win.
Part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's no doubt, Brett, you've got a big job ahead of you over the next 4 years, but the next 12 months are going to be massive as well, because it is a big year on the rugby calendar. It's been fantastic to sit down and have a chat with you about it and get an idea of your vision for the game and where it's heading. We just thank you so much for a bit of time of yours at the end of a Brisbane summer.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, gents, for your time and for your support of the game. We need passionate people that love our sport, promoting it. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll be over there in Brisbane for the Lions. So hopefully over there we'll have a pint.
We can.
Nice, Harry.
Yeah.
We'll tap into your commercial contacts and see how far we can push that. Thanks very much, Brett. All the best with the job, quite sincerely. Well, mate, I really enjoyed that. Really interesting conversation with Brett Robinson to get us going in 2025. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed with myself in not following up. And then I was thinking, it doesn't really matter. It's because we had a lot to talk about and he covered it. But I probably would have loved to push back on some of the hows. And probably the hows are unknown yet. Even though he probably has an idea coming from being a CEO and leading senior care communities in Australia and growing that. I think he knows how to grow things. And my overall impression was probably the smartest chair that we would have had so far. A very smart fella. Likable, straight arrow, kind of a guy you'd want to, if you had to have a friend manage your money, you give it to him and not worry about it going missing. So trust the guy.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure coming away from there was a huge agent of change. I feel like maybe he'd be more of a solidify, which is not bad because I'm of the opinion we don't need to change that much in rugby. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be a toss the tables and upset everything. I think he's going to be trying to build consensus.
Yeah, he used the word contemporary a number of times, which, every time I heard him say contemporary, I interpreted that to be conservative, and I don't actually think that's what he means.
No, I think he meant that young and cool.
Yes, that's probably true too.
Relatable.
Yeah, not 80. I think was the big one there. So, yeah, it was interesting chat. I think a lot of it we've heard before. I think it's fair to say. A lot of what he said to us were things that he was saying going into the vote, and once he actually won the job as well. So I don't think we got any huge revelations. I think it was quite encouraging to hear him say that the Nations Championship looks like it will go ahead now.
Yeah,
and if he could announce that in the next couple of months, I think that would be a big win for him.
I found him to be a very good listener. And one
Yeah.
reflection I had was that he was genuinely interested, and you showed that by making sort of, modest concessions or, things that he hadn't really thought through. Even if it was just watching the Korean special about scrums, you could tell he probably was going to go back and watch it now.
Yes, I thought that too. Yeah, I thought that too. And yeah, it's a good point. There was a few things that we said where he said, oh, actually, yeah, you could see him, ticking that over in his brain. So yeah,
he wasn't too much of a scripted talking points. I have 7 things I must say. I didn't feel like that. I do think that when we gave him too much of a softball question, which we have to do at points, he had that set piece. But in general, he was conversational, and I liked that. And I don't think he was too full of himself at all. He sounded like a humble person. And I think the job is complicated enough where you have to go hat in hand, listening tour. You cannot come in there and just tell everyone what to do. You don't have that much leverage. Yeah,
you can't come in and say, all right, I'm in charge here, and there's going to be some change. Like you can't do that. Yeah, no, it's a fair point. It was a great chat. We really enjoyed it, and we certainly hope you guys did too. But let us know via the socials. We'd be interested to hear your feedback, or indeed leave us a comment if you are watching along here on the YouTube channel as well.
Tell us where we failed you, dropped the ball. I'm sure some of you will.
Or feel free to give us some praise as well. It was a big weekend of Champions Cup rugby, mate. Played over the weekend. The pool stage, the final pool stage, was run and won with some big score lines. It all sort of kicked off with Ulster giving Exeter a bit of a touch up. They're in Belfast.
The problem with that for Ravenhill faithful was what they get out of it is they shock qualified for champions and have to go to Bordeaux.
Yes, we'll come to that.
Damien Pinot not score 6 tries, and so they might have been more happy with the Challenge Cup route.
Yes, true.
Instead of qualifying as not a real contender for the champions.
No, I'll come to the round of 16 games here shortly. The Bulls gave Stade Francais a bit of a touch up, 48-7. Northampton and Munster, which you mentioned earlier on, played a 34-32. A bit of a thriller there. Claremont 33 beat Bristol 26. Benetton beat La Rochelle. That was the big surprise for me, I thought.
Yeah, it was a shock. Benetton's had largely an Italian test international side for a while, but they've underperformed this year. And in the cup itself, they've actually realized some of that potential. And they're a dangerous team when they're all playing on song.
Yeah, no doubt at all. Leinster beat Bath pretty comprehensively, as did Harlequins over Glasgow Warriors. Racing 92 beat the Stormers in Paris. Bordeaux 66 beat the Sharks 12. Cast beat Saracens 32-24. Toulouse 80, Leicester Tigers 12. Now, I'm not surprised that Toulouse won that, but I did not see a 60-point win coming.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. So you look, the macro level here is that the English Premiership sides have not been doing well, and there's a clear delineation now between. You could look at some of the top Premiership sides, and they would compete in the middle of the top 14. The top 14 is clear now. It's well clear in that the top 4 or 5 of their teams would be title contenders in the ERC and the Premiership. Top 14, both in money, both in opportunity, both in the rosters. There are advantages that are built in by national subsidies and the way that they run things in France, with all kinds of edges that we can go into. But it's clearly starting to take effect. And it's not just where you run into a super team like Toulouse, where it's basically the French team minus Pinot, but they got Kinghorn, minus someone, Dante, but they've got Chocobaris, minus Aldrich, but they've got Willis. It's not really minus anybody. It's basically almost
they're not losing out.
And so it's just really rough. So I think some of the teams are having to make choices. That being said, rugby has always been a game where if you get on the down, if you're playing uphill and you're far from home and it's a bad night, the score can get away from you. And it doesn't mean the Leicester Tigers are not going to be there or thereabouts in the Premiership. A and B, they've got a nice little avenue in the final 16. So Don't be surprised if it's a twist and turn. But I will say this. It looked like to me 3 teams and 3 teams only are true contenders this year based on that. It's Bordeaux, Toulouse, and Leinster, who are the teams we always thought they would be.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. The Sale Sharks beat Toulon 33-7 in the final game. So that means,
was also a weird result, by the way.
Yeah, true. That means the round of 16 is set for the weekend of April 4, 5, 6, and it will see Bordeaux hosting Ulster, Leinster will host Harlequins, Claremont will go to Northampton, Saracens will go to Toulon, Sale will go to Toulouse, Cast will host Benetton, Glasgow Warriors will host Leicester Tigers, and La Rochelle will host Munster. Which of those games already stands out for you?
Munster, La Rochelle. Ronan O'Gara, the hero of Munster, playing his old team. It's the more evenly balanced of those contests. Some of those contests are no contest at all. There's too many teams in the Champions Cup. It's really messed up where you have some teams that had 1 win qualify for the round of 16 ahead of teams that had 2 wins. So it's not right. They have to review this system and jigger it. Also, it sets up situations where like the Bulls preferred to be in the Challenge Cup than in the Champions Cup because they knew they couldn't go far and they almost make strategic decisions and selection. But Munster, La Rochelle, that's a game I want to watch. That's interesting.
Yeah. And the way that they've structured the round of 16 games is interesting too, because La Rochelle, Munster would play the winner of Bordeaux, Ulster, and then they could then in turn face a semi-final, probably against Toulouse. Whereas on the other side of it, you've got maybe Leinster and Leicester Tigers maybe facing off in a quarterfinal, but then Northampton.
Leinster has kind of a walk into the final.
They kind of do. There's definitely a
Toulouse
side
bumps into all the French contenders, and like I said, this year in the top 14, I mean Toulouse and Bordeaux, who are favorites, they've had 3 losses in the top 14, and so it's not a given. It's going to be a rough road for the greatest club team in history, Toulouse, to get to the final. Now, if they get there, it's the delicious repeat that we might want to watch. I would say the dark horse in this whole thing, or maybe it's the dark burgundy horse, is
Bordeaux.
It's Bordeaux.
They're the surprise packets for me this year. I didn't have them being as good a team as they are, but they are playing some extraordinary rugby at the moment, and they're very deserving of everything they get from here. But mate, I think that might wrap us up. A bumper first episode of the 8-9 Combo Rugby Podcast for the year, and our sincere thanks to Brett Robinson for helping us launch a big second season. Don't forget, be sure to find and follow the 8-9 Combo on Twitter and on YouTube and on Blue Sky as well to keep up with all of our movements. Leave us a rating or review wherever you can, and share us and wide as you can as well, if you wouldn't mind. Harry and I remain on the socials in our usual places as well, at Harry Baldy Jones and at BMC Sport. This is the 8-9 Combo, the short side set piece combination you did not realize you needed in a rugby podcast. Sean Maloney is ready to go in the closer. I'm Brett McKay. He's Harry Jones, and we'll be back in your ears next week.
Come play with us.
Here goes Jones with another bruising run. He links up with McKay, who pops back to Jones. They can't. They won't. They will. What a try. The Dream Team Combo go in again.